Hello?
Hey, Rich, it's Larson. You got a minute?
Sure, Larson, what's up?
Well, hello and welcome to the Got a Minute podcast. This is your host, Larson Hicks. I'm joined by my co-host, Pastor Rich Lusk. It's good to see you, sir.
Yep, great to be with you. Been a while.
I see you've got an Alabama flag now in your office.
I do.
That's appropriate for this episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was that just for today, or is that a permanent addition?
That's been a permanent feature for a while. So
Do most people know that the Alabama flag is a St. Andrew's cross?
in my congregation,
Or am I making that up? Is that wrong?
no, that is true. That is true. It is a Christian symbol.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
We are a state that exists and operates under the cross.
Praise God. Well, let's keep it that way.
Let's make it that way. I'm not sure it is that way right at the moment, the way it needs to be.
Let's make it that way. That's right.
But we have a guest who's trying his best to do that.
We can get theological about this. You know, all authority on heaven and earth has been given to Christ. So
That's true.
it is whether they like it or not.
That's true.
Well, I'm excited about our conversation today, Rich. We've got the CEO of 1819 News, Bryan Dawson, on the call. What's up, Bryan? Good to have you, man.
Yeah, fired up to be here, man. Like two of my favorite people. Larson, I like you more when you have your mustache, but you know you're at about 80% right now, and obviously Rich is the Alabama's pastor. That's my goal, is to brand Rich as Alabama's pastor. Now that he's got his flag, and when you were asking and you said, "Did you know that the Alabama flag is?" and I said, "An undercover Confederate flag." And you said the St. Andrew's cross, which is like, okay, potato, potato, but yeah, same thing.
The Confederate flag has St. Andrew's cross as well.
Correct. So, yeah, no, but I love it. And make Alabama Christian again.
Yes, that's beautiful. Well, and you also have, I see you've got a hat back there with the Alabama flag. So I'm the odd man out here. I'm feeling kind of lame. That's beautiful. I'm feeling kind of lame that I don't have my Alabama flag here. I'm going to have to rectify that. Well, yeah, there's 1,000 things we could talk about. I'm actually in the middle of listening to the podcast. What was it, Bryan, that the world and everything in it that talked about that crazy story that you guys had on Bubba Copeland?
Yeah, no, and you know, so much to say about that, but what I appreciated so much, so World Magazine, I mean, you're talking about like a real, legitimate, historic news organization that comes from a Christian perspective, but does real boots on the ground journalism. One of few institutions that still does real journalism. And Kim Henderson came out here last November and spent hours upon hours with me. Went to Craig's house, who is the journalist who wrote the Bubba Copeland story. Spent hours with him and his kids. And then she drove to Phoenix City. And I'll go into that story a little bit so that there's context for people who don't know about it. But then she went to Phoenix City and met with Bubba Copeland's people, right? Who does that anymore? No one does that anymore. And so the fact, you know, that we were vindicated from a journalistic standpoint through World Magazine's actual real reporting, telling both sides and it becoming crystal clear. Because when that story came out, buddy, it was Craig, it was Jeff Poor, our editor-in-chief. We, 1819 News, were front page news on the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Daily Beast, the Guardian for 3 weeks straight. We got to feel what it felt like to be Donald Trump for 3 weeks. And it's not fun to have those media outlets pointed at you and the angry leftist mob that reads those outlets as though it was gospel truth, getting all fired up in their basement with their purple hair and their nose rings, going to town, doing all their opposition research on you, figuring out where your address is and putting pictures of your family up with your home address underneath, talking about killing your kids. Happened to me, happened to Jeff, happened to Craig. It's an interesting thing. And you know, the overall consensus, I'd say, when the story broke and when it happened and all that came down, I'd say it was about 75% of people thought that we should have been sued or that we were guilty of this. And it was about 25% of the people were on our side. You know, now 2 years later, 2.5 years later, whatever it's been, I guess it's now 3 years later. Geez. 3 years later, now the overall consensus is like 95-5 that, oh, wow, 1819 actually did their jobs. And, you know, Bubba chose to do what he did. So context on the story, October 31st, 2023, I think it was, we got a tip from a very trustworthy source who's given us many good stories before. And he said that, hey, the mayor of Smith Station is not only up to no good in some political things he's doing, but what you also need to know is that he's living a double life as an online trans porn star, and he's the pastor of First Baptist Church, Phoenix City. So he's a double public figure, pastor, mayor. And he's posting pictures of himself under his alter ego on Reddit and these other social media channels where he is, dressed in drag. I don't know what the distinction between a tranny and drag is. I've yet to figure it out. It's all the same to me. But whatever it was doing, there was him dressed up in lady clothes. And then if that's all it was some dude in his living room putting on his wife's clothes as a fetish. Weird, not a news story. Not a news story, but weird. But that's not all it was. It was like full on gay porn shoots in his alter ego, trans alter ego. He was writing homoerotic slasher fiction, talking about killing people in the community. I'll get to that. He was encouraging children as a pastor and a mayor to transition their gender under this alter ego on public forums. And it was really bad. And then so, we knew if we did this story, it would explode and it would go viral, as the kids say. And we knew it would change everyone's lives forever. It was one of those stories. And so Jeff Poor, our editor-in-chief, who's an absolute stud, he and I stayed up till midnight going back and forth, kind of playing devil's advocate. If we do this, here's the response. Should we do it? But just kind of going back and forth. And ultimately he said, Bryan, if your kids went to that church, would you want to know? I said, send it. We're doing it. And that's what it boiled down to. And so we published the first story that was about his escapades and everything. But in that first story was a meme that he had up on his public forums where it was a picture of a 14-year-old boy and a girl, and it looked like the boy had transitioned into the girl. And in the meme, it said, take the shots, get the implants, become the whore. And it looked like this boy had transitioned into this girl. So that was in the story. It publishes on a Wednesday morning, and it goes insanely viral, just like we knew it would. And a parent reached out to us and said, hey, can you take my kid's picture off your website? Like, what are you talking about? He said, that's my son and my daughter on that meme about the get the shots and the whore thing. That's my son and my daughter, and they in his community. And so he's taking pictures of kids in his community, making these kind of like fantasy transing memes where he's encouraging them to transition their gender. Also, we received countless phone calls from girls that were, saying, because it's not on the record, I can't really say, but some people who he had harmed. Okay. And it's like, when you do that story, then all of a sudden all these other stories come in. And so then Wednesday night, he got in the pulpit of First Baptist Church, Phoenix City, and he downplayed it and defended himself. And so from there, we continued to just drip out stories, drip, drip, drip. Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon, Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, Friday morning, Friday afternoon is our page flips. And the last story we did was homoerotic slasher fiction. What's that? Well, you'll figure it out when I tell you. He was writing about a real woman, used her name and the name of her business, who actually lived in his community and was friends with his wife. And in this fiction that he was writing, he said that he was going to stalk her and mimic her every move so that he could kill her and transition into her identity to have sex with her husband. That story broke at 2 p.m. on that Friday, and 4 p.m., the Lee County Sheriffs went to go just do a wellness check. Hey, are you okay? Because now all these stories have all gone super crazy viral all over the world, not just in America. And so they're going to check on him to make sure he's okay. He wasn't at his house, and as they're leaving the neighborhood, they come to a four-way stop, and they see Bubba Copeland's car. So they turn their lights on just to say, hey, we're doing a wellness check. Well, the wicked flee when no one pursues. They turned their lights on, and he, boom, it took off, and they got into a chase. And the chase came to an end. When the chase came to an end, he got out brandishing a pistol. Sheriffs are drawing down on him now, and he says, I'm not going to take this blank anymore, puts the gun to his head, blows his brains out. So he kills himself, and now in leftist woke mind virus, blood is on your hands, Bryan Dawson. Blood is on your hands, Craig Monger. Blood is on your hands, Jeff Poore. Blood is on your hands, 1819 News became the resounding theme. And the New York Times, Washington Post, Daily Beast, Guardian comes out. Then all the crazy death threats, and it was just insane response to that. And so, like I said, the general consensus was that we killed a man, and then now the general consensus 3 years later is, oh, you guys were just doing your job. And that podcast did probably the best summary of the events that took place 3 years ago in October that anyone could have done. I'm super grateful for World Magazine and Kim Henderson.
Well, I think it's it's actually a perfect example, I think, to try to kind of frame up what I was hoping to talk about today, which is what is the purpose of the press, and what role does the press and the media play in a free society? And I think just looking at this specific example, we think of media as entertainment, as kind of the news. It's how you understand what's going on in the world. But I don't know that we necessarily see that the media is changing things or impacting lives. And in this particular example, you have a guy who is both, a leader in the government locally and also in the church, and so obviously has a very significant role in the lives of his entire community. And your news coverage, made a very significant impact on that particular town. It obviously got attention, but there's also downstream effects, right? For others with those kinds of proclivities and wicked people that are in those kinds of positions. It's now, I would imagine that they're essentially on notice that, hey, in Alabama, this kind of stuff is not going to go unnoticed, or you've got a media outlet that is actually going to expose these kinds of things. So I guess maybe before diving into that conversation about the role of the press and media in a society, give us, for any listeners we've got that aren't even familiar with 1819 News, give us like the high level, who are you guys and what's your mission?
Yeah, so on one hand, we are a statewide, state-focused news and multimedia company with the express purpose of taking out AL.com, which is the left-leaning media outlet of record here in the state. And maybe some point later I can get into the history of how that came to be. But on one hand, that's what we are. But really, we are a Christian ministry. Okay, we are a Christian ministry that's dedicated to the preservation of our way of life and the advancement of Christendom, or Christ's kingdom on earth. And we're using media, journalism, accountability as a means to do those things. Because again, the truth is on our side, and if we're just telling the truth, Christ's kingdom is expanding, right? And so we're holding politicians accountable. We're holding institutions accountable, our universities, state legislature, all these different bureaucracies, the Alabama Department of Transportation and the Alabama Department of this and Department of that, city councils, county commissions, etc. There has been no press in the state that was really respectable and had a broad enough reach to actually make an impact doing this. And I'll say this really quickly, and I think it'll tee up the conversation well. Devin Foley at 1819 came in and he did this research for this purpose and said, when a news outlet in a city, like a legitimate news organization, goes under, which many did back in 2007, when they go under, the cost of doing business in the government begins to just skyrocket, right? And when you think about that, it's basically that you have all these entities with all this money and all these tax dollars, and there's not a check and balance system built in anymore. They can literally do whatever they want. They can put out press releases that saying that they're honoring, their oaths and that they're doing everything they're supposed to do. And look at this really pretty thing. And there's no one saying, yeah, I know that, but this. No one was doing that. And so, everything's just been running wild, unchecked for years now in the state of Alabama at every level.
It's great. Well, yeah, I before we started recording, you mentioned that my brothers heard me talking about this book about fifth gen warfare. So I guess it's time to bring that up. It's I'm on the board at New St. Andrews College. I just joined, and they read a book every quarter. And the book they read this year is Fifth Generation Warfare: Dominating the Human Domain by Armin Krishnan. It was written in 2024. But it's an academic book that kind of goes through the history of warfare, and really this progression to less and less kinetic and violent warfare into more of the where the domain is land or sea or air, and the domain as we get into further and further generations of warfare. The domain becomes the human domain, the battle for hearts and minds, and there's this concept that I remember reading about in the book of net war, and there's kind of this temptation a lot of times to think about conspiracies, and everything major that happens is everything major that happens in the world is some sort of conspiracy, whether it's 9/11 or it's the assassination of Charlie Kirk or fill in the blank, COVID. I heard a quote, and I wish I could remember where the quote came from. Maybe you guys will remember. But I was actually, this is some name dropping. I was in Moscow last week, and I was sitting on my friend Gabe Wrench's back porch from Cross Politic with Pastor Wilson and Jeremy Boring, the former CEO of Daily Wire, and Joel Berry is the former managing editor of the Babylon Bee. And we were talking about all this stuff, and Doug dropped a quote, which I can't remember, but the gist of the quote was, not every major world event is a psyop, but 100% of the responses to every major world event are psyops. And to me, the basic point is that, God's enemies, the powerful, the rich, fill in the blank, are never going to let a crisis go to waste. They're always going to try to make hay in one form or another, and that effort doesn't have to be a coordinated effort by some boogeyman in the shadows. It more often is kind of temporary alliances with overlapping interests and objectives, but there's this kind of coordination and conspiring and collusion that starts to take place where people are working together, and they're all kind of pushing a narrative to whatever major world event it is that we're all responding to. And so I think that I see that, they went through a number of specific examples, like COVID, and how China mobilized, hundreds of thousands of internet bots to push this narrative, that this thing didn't originate in China, that the rest of the world wasn't responding properly, that America was killing its people because it wasn't locking down the way they were. And it was an act of warfare. I mean, it was effective, right? I mean, we shut our economy down. It was devastating. We're still not, we're going to be feeling the impact of COVID for generations. But anyway, in that particular example, and many others, you just see the massive impact of the media, and I guess I found myself throughout the book thinking, all the examples I'm reading about of effective execution of fifth generation warfare are all negative examples. They're all bad examples, of our enemies utilizing this. And I'm thinking the whole time, when are Christians going to, intentionally sort of engage in this battle for hearts and minds, and actually work to shape the narrative of what's going on in the world? If anybody should be doing that, it should be the prophetic voice of the church and Christians. So anyway, I'll put that there and let you guys respond.
Yeah, so I think that's really good, Larson, and I would agree with that. I would actually argue that many aspects of what we call fifth generation warfare have been going on a long, long, long time. They're not new. The whole idea of a propaganda campaign or control of the media, shaping narratives, that kind of thing. I mean, that's obviously got a really, really long history. There are certain aspects of this that are obviously tied in with modern technology and things about modern culture that are really different. So, but this is, who controls the narrative has been an issue probably as far back as you can go in human history since the fall, pretty much. And I think one thing to keep in mind with journalism is that there is a difference between neutrality and objectivity. Neutrality is impossible. Objectivity is a sound goal for journalists, but there's no such thing as neutrality. No such thing as what we might call worldview neutrality. So, like with 1819 News, with the Bubba Copeland story, uh, the facts that were reported were objective. The way those facts were interpreted, obviously, the reason they were presented the way that they were had to do with the particular worldview, which from which 1819 operates, and that's really really crucial. Just like it matters where you get your history, because let's face it, history is one of the most contested areas in the culture war. It's one of the front lines of the culture war. We've seen that, I think, especially this year with America's 250th. Lots of debates over American history, and it matters. It matters whose version of history you accept. And you could, obviously that's true across the board. Well, the same is true when it comes to journalism and these kind of stories. And, I've made the point before that, just as fake history is really, really damaging, fake news is really, really damaging as well. And so I think that with the collapse of trust in our institutions, and that certainly includes, I mean, I'm a pastor, I would say there's been a collapse of trust in the pastorate. I think especially since 2020, we've had a collapse of trust in other major institutions like medicine and journalism and all kinds of things that we could list where there's been a collapse of trust. There's been a collapse of social trust in general. I mean, you just think about the fact that you used to be able to hitchhike your way all the way across America, and that's because we were a stable, high trust society. It's one of you're two strangers, but it's one American picking up another American and taking him where he needs to go as a favor. And there's a kind of trust there. Well, obviously that kind of trust is completely gone. Now we can't even define what an American is, and you don't know the person you would be picking up is an American. There's not that inherent trust and implicit trust that was once there. So I think we see all of these things collapsing around us, and I think the question is always, well, okay, so for us as Christians, how do we rebuild? How do we make Alabama Christian again? How do we make America Christian again? That's what we're aiming at, and we cannot do that without faithful Christian institutions. And that means, obviously faithful Christian churches, but it also means faithful Christian schools, faithful Christian universities. It certainly means, faithful Christian news, media, journalism. We have to have it. We cannot rebuild what we're aiming to rebuild without that. And that's why I think the work of 1819 is so incredibly important.
Yeah, Bryan, tell the story about. I remember you talking about school choice in Alabama and the impact that 1819's had on that.
Sure. Yeah. So when we first launched 1819 News, we set out our priorities of things that we think, if we're trying to make generational impact in the state, what are the things that we think that shining a light on can then turn into real generational change. Obviously, education was at the very top of that list. And what we looked at in the state of Alabama as it pertained to education was the more money we spent on education, the worse it got. And the worse it got, the more money was given. And so on any trend line of any business person, they would say, wow. And the end of that incentive structure is if nobody can read, we get all the money. And the Education Trust Fund, and so in Alabama you have two funds. You have the general fund, which runs everything else, and then you have the Education Trust Fund. These are rough numbers. They're not exact. I think the education trust fund is $12 billion, and it costs $3.5 billion to run the rest of the government. Okay, and so that's insane. And we have some of the lowest test scores in the country, even though we're spending 4 times what we do on the rest of the government combined. We're spending on education and getting terrible results. And we said, okay, we have to break up this monopoly and create some type of a competitive structure that would cause these schools to actually have to compete for those dollars rather than underperforming and getting guaranteed, raises. So school choice was the obvious thing that we began to look at. We were launched by the Alabama Policy Institute, and so they had done, yeoman's work and fishing out all that. And what we found was that school choice was polling at 72% in favor of school choice, whether it was white, black, Republican, Democrat, didn't matter. 72% of people wanted to be able to send their kids where they wanted to send their kids, and the tax dollars that were attributed to their kids needed to follow their kids, whether that was through voucher, God, what do they call those schools? That's, charter schools, whatever. They wanted some alternative to the thing that was being forced down their throat that was of no value. And so we said, okay, everybody wants it, and we're not getting it. What's going on? And someone told us and said, well, you should look into the Alabama Education Association's donations to Republicans. And the ALGOP, which is the Alabama Republican Party, states in their bylaws that candidates are, it's like strongly discouraged. It needs to say shall not, but since there was just like this little wiggle room in the bylaw, it was basically saying, should not, strongly recommend not, whatever the wording was. But it was understood that it was forbidden to take money from the teachers union, okay? And it says the NEA or its state-level affiliates. The Alabama Education Association is the state-level affiliate of the NEA. And so despite that ALGOP bylaw, they were giving, I think they gave away, again, rough numbers, they gave away like $1.5 million, not this past election cycle, but the cycle before, which is what we were focused on. And 1 million of that went to Republicans. 500,000 went to Democrats. Now, if you're the AAA, of course, that makes sense because we're a Republican supermajority. However, these candidates were not supposed to be taking money from the teachers union, and they were to the tune of, millions of dollars, huge donations, and it was obviously affecting the decisions that were being made in the legislature. You had something that was tremendously popular that was not getting passed because of the sway that these donations were giving over that. So we highlighted the Alabama Education Association, which, again, the NEA is one of the most worst communist, Marxist, Christ-hating organizations in the world. And AEA is their state-level affiliate. We highlighted how they've essentially hijacked the Republican Party apparatus and Republican candidates. So we highlighted the AEA, then we highlighted the poor performance and the perverts in the public schools, right? And so it was just this constant, steady stream of exposing the waste, fraud, and abuse in the public education, the realm of public education, as well as highlighting all these sick, deranged, critical race theory, transgender, all that kind of stuff. But then we highlighted alternatives. Okay, and we went to, there's a school in Birmingham, I think it's called Cornerstone, where they take impoverished black students in an impoverished black neighborhood. They spend $7,000 a student, something-ish, and these kids are getting 25s and higher on their ACTs and going up to Huntsville and getting a job in STEM, making $100,000 a year. Meanwhile, we're spending $14,000 a student in the state schools, and they can't read. And so, and they always say, well, it's because the quality of the student. It's like, well, Cornerstone's taking that same student and doing something with them. You're not. What gives? So we exposed, highlighted alternatives. And so you talk about fifth-gen warfare, that's like our own little positive propaganda circle, if you will. And after doing that for 18 months, worth noting that Del Marsh, who was the Senate pro tem for a number of years, most powerful senator in the state, had excellent school choice legislation for 12 years in a row. And the most powerful senator in the state couldn't get his bill out of committee. He couldn't get his bill out of committee because there was so much pressure by the AEA to not let school choice through. And so after 12 years of them not even being able to get a bill out of committee, 18 months of us doing this, Kay Ivey comes out and says, we're going to be the most school choice friendly state in the nation. It's my Foghorn Leghorn Kay Ivey impression. And so they passed school choice, and the Attorney General came to an 1819 News board meeting and sat down and talked with my highest level investors and my board of directors and said, if it was not for 1819 News, school choice would never have been a priority, and it wouldn't have gotten across the finish line. This is a direct result of your reporting that we now have school choice.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fantastic example of the way that media can create pressure and build momentum for something that yeah, I mean, this kind of rhino problem in Alabama, and I know it's true all over the country, but where you have these just incredibly obvious, conservative causes and potential for legislation that just never goes anywhere, and it's kind of confounding, to the citizenry why these Republicans, these conservatives, don't actually legislate in a conservative way. I think you've given in that example a perfect demonstration of how this all works, and yeah, until a light's being shined on it, in a consistent and effective way, this stuff just continues forever and ever.
Yeah, well, it shows you how much shaping that narrative and exposing facts really does make a difference, how important that work is. And when you've got a monopoly on, say, something like journalism, like, say, when you go back not too far in our state's history and AL.com controls pretty much everything with the media, well, they've got their own agenda, and they're foisting that agenda on us, and that agenda does not serve the good of Alabama, and it doesn't serve the Christianization of Alabama. It serves the opposite. And so you have, so they've got that monopoly on media. 1819 comes along, breaks that stranglehold, and all of a sudden you start to see these changes that could not have been made before now being made because certain things have been exposed, and it is incredibly helpful. Now, personally, I mean, I'd like to see federal and state governments get out of education altogether. So I mean, state. Or let me put it this way: school choice is a wonderful step in the right direction. I still don't think of it as the end goal, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. And I think the fact that we had so many Republican politicians who are being bought off by a, liberal, basically communist teachers union, that's the kind of thing that the citizens of this state need to know, and otherwise never would have. And so in a sense, you're holding elected officials accountable, and there's not an easy way for citizens to do that on their own, especially if they don't have access to all the information, or it's very difficult to get that information. So again, something like 1819 plays an absolutely vital role in that work. The people need to know those things, and that historically has been one of the key roles, one of the chief roles of the media, is to expose those kinds of things, hold rulers accountable, hold civil officials accountable, and we haven't had that. I think one thing that happens in states that are more or less uniparty states, like Alabama, is that those who are part of that majority party, so we're a heavily Republican state, obviously, they can get elected, they can get through the primary, they can easily get elected just because they have an R next to their name. It doesn't really matter what they believe or what they do, and they can sort of slide by. And honestly, they can also sell themselves off to the highest bidder very easily. And then they can make excuses for why they could not accomplish certain things. And the public, of course, has a hard time figuring out, is that really true? So 1819 comes along and basically exposes all of that, exposes what our Republican majority rulers were actually doing and how they were beholden to this teachers union, and we finally start to get results. And that, getting results is what matters. The point is not just to fight, the point is to win. And this was a win for us.
I mean, obviously, this is just. Our government was founded on this idea that we can't trust the government, right? I mean, this is like baked into the Constitution, this idea of checks and balances, and this is a huge role that the media, a free press, is supposed to play in a society. Is just that, is holding these folks accountable, shining a light. When you have the one of the driving reasons for that suspicion is just that, when you have people who are in control and who make laws and regulations, there's an obvious draw to influence those people through money, and you see 12 billion in this education trust fund. That's a lot of money, and that's a lot of people's cousins and nephews and friends that are getting contracts to do work at in exorbitant rates, et cetera, et cetera. There's a big industrial complex built up around something with that kind of money, that kind of centralized money. And so there's a huge interest by all those involved and who would like to get some of that money, to try to shape it and to try to keep that money centralized, so that favors can be done. I guess on the topic of money, Bryan, how do you keep a media organization from that same kind of problem? With money. When 1819 becomes the most important news outlet in Alabama, and it may already be that, but as you become that, what protects you guys from that same being vulnerable to that same kind of corruption and control by powerful interests?
That's a great question. It's a question we have to deal with every day, with every interaction, with every person who reaches out and has an idea, and with every, and again, they get more and more creative. At first, it was like, oh, they're crazy. Nobody reads 1819 news. Then it's like, holy crap, everybody reads 1819 news. I want to be friends. And it's like, okay, we can be friends. It's not going to get you anything, but we can be friends. And then now they're just kind of throwing their hands in the air, like, we don't know what the hell to do with these people, essentially, is where we are now. But the temptation when you're looking to make payroll and you have this thing where you can start to justify, why it would actually be okay in this case to do this thing, it's ever present. And so culture is what matters, culture and accountability. And so I have a board of directors and a board of advisors. And then I've got an internal team who knows what the mission is. And the one thing that would ruin everything at 1819 News is if there was even the smell or hint of financial influence to control editorial decision making, right? And so that's everybody that's and so there's a thing in historic journalism. They call it, there was a firewall between publishing, which would be my section of the company, and the newsroom, which would be Jeff's section of the company. Okay, that's how they used to do it when journalism was a real thing. And we have done our best to bring that back. And I don't know anyone else who is doing that. I really don't. It doesn't exist anywhere else that I've ever seen. And so, the other thing as it pertains to culture and who you're hiring and communicating your mission and it being in the DNA of every person in the company, my journalists, if they ever smelled, hey, it's one thing if you're just like, oh, we're writing this puff piece because it's semi-relevant and newsworthy and whatever. It's another thing to be like, hey, we're going to choose not to do this story because it would upset a donor. If that ever happened and my journalists got wind of it, they would freak out and leave. Okay. Or, hey, this donor gave us this much money, therefore we're going to report this story in a way that's not exactly what we believe it to be. If that ever happened, they would walk out, right? And so again, it's that culture, it's who you hire, and then it's having this accountability mechanism. And I'll even give you another instance of like how the board works in the situation. We have someone who wants to come in and donate money who's involved in, let's say, the pornography industry, because this really happened. And they wanted to donate a substantial sum of money, and it was extremely tempting. I was no, but it's like, I have a fiduciary duty to this organization to make sure that we have funds necessary to do our job. He's not asking us to write anything a certain way. He's not doing any of those things. And so I bring it to the board and unanimous no. Right. And so we have these people there's multiple people making these decisions and holding accountable. And any of them can call me up and be like, hey, I know so-and-so gives us money and I saw how you wrote that story. Could you please explain? Right? That's ever present. It's never really had to been used, but it's there. And so But yeah, I mean, it's just something it's the ever present reality that we're aware of and that we talk about. If that makes sense, we don't pretend like it's not there.
So do you guys take any money from advertisers?
We're open to different advertisers, depending on, and kind of just our policy real quick is multi-tiered. I don't ever want to say, we'll just say Chick-fil-A, okay? Chick-fil-A wanted to come in and advertise with 1819 News, and they're giving us $500,000 a year, and Bubba Copeland kills himself. We just lost $500,000 a year. So I'm never going to bring on an advertiser that's going to bail on us when we have to do our job, one. And then the other thing is going to be, can I actually get this advertiser a return on their investment or not? And then if a car dealer in Birmingham wanted to sell cars through 1819, there's people reading in Mobile that don't give a damn about his car dealership in Birmingham, right? So there's this layered approach. And so we've never really found anyone that we're just super duper excited. Now they're out there. And again, I don't want to get too into the weeds or nitty gritty, as Nacho Libre would say, but it's just, in order to, it's like, does this organization run on gas or diesel? And once we set ourselves up to be a nonprofit news organization, that means that all of our resources in our sales department is a fundraising shop, not an ad sales shop. And if we sold all the inventory on 1819 News for what it's, the going market rate, and we have lots of unsold inventory that exists within all of our dissemination chains, it's about $170,000 a year. Well, last year we hit 2.7 million. So like ads couldn't float us, couldn't fund us. And the last thing I'll say about this is when I talk to other conservatives, and this is just a huge blind spot and Achilles heel in conservatism and why we've been able to pull this off where other conservatives and Christians haven't, is, well, how's this thing going to make money, Brian? Show me how it's going to make money. How am I going to get rich on this? Like, could you show me, like how I'm going to get rich and how I'm going to make money? And I said, this is like mission statement day one. If you get into media, specifically in this cultural environment that we're in this fifth gen warfare environment that we're in, if you get into media to make money, you'll never make a difference because you'll always be kowtowing to advertisers and things like that. But if you get into media to make a difference, you will eventually make money. But it's not going to be the way that they want that's instantaneous. Why aren't we selling more ads? Our goal is to make an impact. And then we turn around and take the impact that we've made and we bring that back to philanthropic investors and say, your money made generational change. Here's how. Keep investing.
No, that's good. I mean, this is true of any business, right? I mean, this is also true in the church. Is this idea that your mission has to be central. It has to be at the forefront of everything you do, and money is a necessary component of achieving your mission. But if your mission is first and foremost to make money, obviously that impacts everything about every decision you make. If your mission is about making a difference, in this case in Alabama politics, then that impacts everything. And so that's a good answer. Rich, you had something?
Well, yeah, I think those same temptations, to one degree or another, every Christian is confronted with those same kinds of temptations. Certainly in the pastorate you are. So really you have to be anchored to your mission. You have to be anchored to the truth. And that's that's got to be most important. And then everything else is downstream from that. I mean, obviously you have to make money to live. 1818 has to raise money to survive. But one thing that I think is really, really important, because 1819, again, it's a nonprofit. It's driven, there's a fundraising element, obviously, to what 1819 does. And maybe Brian can talk about how to give to 1819 if any of our audience wants to do that. But one thing that I think is really important to keep in mind is that Christians will find themselves, we find ourselves being asked for money to support all different kinds of things. And many of those things are good. Many of those things are worthwhile. Many of those things would be worthy investments. Okay. You think about the parable of the talents, the master gives a certain amount of money to his servants and he's expecting a return on that investment. Probably the best example of this kind of thing is, I forget the philanthropist's name, but he gave Charlie Kirk like $10,000. Okay. think about the return he got on his $10,000 investment. Okay. That to me is the best illustration of the parable of the talents. What Charlie Kirk took $10,000 and he turned it into this multi-million-dollar, incredibly influential organization. And sadly, without him there, I don't think it's the same. But I mean, that's what he was able to do. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face, particularly in, let's just say, in our Bible Belt environment, where I think there's a lot of comfortable sort of status quo Christianity. And I think there's also a lot of pietism. This is something we've talked about, over the years on this podcast, Lars, is the kind of pietism where there's a very narrow understanding of spirituality. And the mission of the church is really just evangelism. It's evangelizing the nations, but not discipling the nations. So it comes up short in terms of how it understands the Great Commission. I think one of the greatest challenges that we have is especially helping Christians who have a lot of money and are looking for a place to invest that money where they can get a real return on their investment. Like, again, if they're the master in the parable of the talents, where can I put my talents? Who can I deposit these talents with where I'll get the best possible return? I want to go find that guy who, if I give him 5 talents, he's going to turn it into 10. I don't want to invest in the guy who, if I give him 1 talent, he's going to go bury it. Okay, so how are you going to get the most return on your investment? I think it's really important for Christians to understand that what we think of as the culture war, which I think that's a good name for it, it's Pat Buchanan's language. But I almost think we need to pivot and start just saying, the culture war really is the spiritual war. So many manifestations of what we call the culture war are really just the spiritual war incarnated. And I think it's really important for Christians who are looking for a place to invest their dollars to say, okay, this culture war matters. Like there's a very real sense in which the future well-being of your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren very much depends on what we do in our generation. Because I really do think that you could say Alabama in particular and America in general is really at a crossroads. And, I'm sure it feels that way in every generation to some degree, but I think it's really, really true in our day. We are at a fork in the road, and which way are we going to go? Are we going to become a, basically Marxist communist nation where we just take the next several steps in the secular progressive direction, or are we going to actively seek to re-Christianize our nation? And if you want to see the kind of America that we once knew and loved, the kind of America where you could raise a family and you could thrive on one income, where the man's the breadwinner and the woman is a wife and mother and is home to raise her children. If you want to see a place where sexual perversion is not being foisted on us all the time, where sexual perversion is being suppressed as it should be, where sexual perversion is not being put in our face all the time. If you want to live in a coherent nation, a coherent culture, you have to fight for it. You have to fight for it. Battles were won in previous generations. We are the beneficiaries of those victories, but battles don't stay won. They have to be refought in every generation. You have to defend what has been, the turf that has been gained. If you lose turf, you have to work, you have to fight to get it back. Okay, so if you think about the mission of the church more broadly, it's not just about evangelism, it's also about discipleship. It's not even just evangelism plus mercy ministry, because sometimes that's how people start to think of it. Well, it's evangelism, but it's also helping the poor. That's totally true. That's part of it. But it's discipling the nation, and that means Christianizing the nation. That means forming Christendom. Jesus is king, and he's building a civilization. Jesus is king, and he's building a kingdom that does manifest itself in very visible ways in earth, on the earth, and in history, in human cultures. So how do you make that happen? Well, it obviously takes money. You don't build a civilization for free. Civilization building is not cheap. It's going to cost a lot of money to build the next Christendom. Okay, so how do you do it? Well, I think works like 1819 are a great place to invest your talents, because you're going to get a return on that investment in something that is massive, in something that is incredibly important. We talked about school choice. Okay, so if you invested some money in 1819 news, well, now you've got all of these Christian families who are able to suddenly afford Christian education, whereas they couldn't before, that now becomes an option for them. That is hugely important because we will not re-Christianize our nation without Christian education. And you could go down the list of all these different things, all these different ways in which it really, really matters. So I think if there's somebody out there who has a lot of money and they're thinking, okay, where can I get the best return on my investment? I think something like this is an incredible investment to make because you're going to get a return, and it's going to be the kind of return that puts another block in the rebuilding of Christendom. Another brick is going to be laid in the rebuilding of Christendom. And really, that's what we should desire.
Real quick, I'm just going to 2 cents dovetail on what you just said. The people who have invested the most in 1819 are the most pleased investors, okay? And all of my donors, maybe not all, but vast majority of my donors are very pleased with their investment. I got guys who've given me now over $1 million to $1.5 million who, and Larson has seen the video where we did video testimonials, and I don't share these guys' names out there broadly, otherwise we could play it here. They're saying this is the best investment I've ever made, or this is the best philanthropic investment I've ever made. This is the best investment we've ever made in the state of Alabama. That's the 3 testimonies of my 3 biggest donors.
The way I would put it, going back to my earlier analogy, I wish I could remember the investor's name who gave Charlie Kirk that $10,000. I would say to philanthropists in the state of Alabama, 1819 News is the Charlie Kirk of Alabama. And so if you invest your money in this, I think you're going to see very outsized returns in what you get for your money. This podcast wasn't really intended to be a fundraiser for 1819, but I really can't help saying that because I very much believe in the mission and the people involved in this organization.
Well, a couple of comments just to underline, what's just been said, but the point about the Great Commission being not centrally about, I think we forget that the Great Commission starts with Jesus saying, "All authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore," and so the go disciple the nations. This idea of discipleship is not, again, it's not primarily about conversion, but it's about teaching. And he says specifically, teaching them everything that I'm forgetting the exact wording, but to observe all that I have commanded. So this is the work of the Great Commission, and I think we've been kind of duped, I would say, by missionary fundraisers that the primary mission, the primary call in the Great Commission is to convert people. It's actually discipling, teaching the nations, and we have a lot of work to do there here in our own backyard. Your point about just the school choice thing. If you were somebody in Alabama who wanted to bring about school choice and make Christian education more accessible to Christians in Alabama, you would have been flushing your money down the toilet for the last 10, 20 years, giving that money to GOP candidates because they were unable, even the most powerful leader in the state could not get that bill out of committee. And so there's a real ROI here that I think is important to highlight. The other thing I thought of just when we were talking a minute ago about mission, I think it's just worth mentioning is this is a problem that everybody I think struggles with personally, is this idea of what is my mission, what is my calling, what is my vocation. And I think we can all think of many, many examples of friends who have been told it's about the career ladder, it's about earning more and moving towards retirement. And those are the people who burn out. Those are the people who go through midlife crises because they put their they made their mission making money, and then they look up one day and go, "Is this all there is? I've just invested half of my life in this pursuit that I don't really even know I care about. I'm a fill in the blank, doing X, Y, and Z, and I'm just a cog in a machine that I don't really believe in. There's nothing wrong with being a cog necessarily, but there is a back to your parable of the talents. There is a command from Christ of stewardship that we all have. He's given us all a calling. He's put a the Spirit is inspiring each of us in unique ways to go do the thing that God's built us to do. And when we start to replace that, or not pursue that, not pursue discovering what it is God has built me to do, I think those are the scenarios where people find themselves, really disappointed, about their life choices. I had one other thread I'd love to pull, Bryan. I know we're coming up on an hour here, but we've talked about sort of how do you protect the mission of 1819, the influence of money and advertisers and pulling you away from that. The other thing that I've observed, and I'd love to hear your thought about, is kind of the catnip, let's call it, of conspiracy theories in the conservative, media. I know that conspiracy theory itself is a psyop. It's a way to sort of denigrate anybody who points out a conspiracy. But there is this kind of rage baiting kind of black pill. I think of like Alex Jones. I think of Candace Owens. These people that find that, wow, I get incredible engagement when I start deconstructing and poking holes in and trying to expose these things that are just, whether it's the moon landing or flat earth or whatever it is, that's just such a huge business, and it's so profitable. And I can see how difficult it would be if I were in your shoes, to not let your audience and the engagement that you get start to draw you further and further into that kind of focus. Have you guys thought about that, or do you see that, or do you think I'm crazy?
No, I think I started 1819 News because I am a conspiracy theorist. Because I'll just be honest. Because evil people are constantly conspiring to seize power and use that power for their own political ends, personal gain, and gratification. That's happening at all times, always. So 9/11, it was a conspiracy, whether it was, Afghanis in caves, whether it was Mossad or whether it was someone conspired to make that happen. So now we want to know who was it. And so I think that's worth investigating. I don't think Candace is doing it for clicks. I think she really believes that there's holes in the narrative. And I honestly think Candace is, maybe her tactics and the way she's going about it, we can argue about that. But I think at the heart of it, is who killed Charlie Kirk, how and why. I'm interested. I want to know who killed him. I don't have a theory necessarily that I'm willing to throw out there, but I am interested because, JFK, when he was assassinated, everyone's like, just believe the narrative. And that's fine. Well, here we are 60 years later, and all the conspiracy theorists were proven right. And so anytime these things happen, there needs to be people with the right heart and the right mind who are going in and pressure testing the official narrative, because the official narrative, I can't think of one single time the official narrative was ever true. I can't find one time. The government has comms teams to spin up official narratives, and the point of the journalist is to listen to that official narrative and poke holes in it. That's literally what we do. Before 1819, press release would be put out by well-paid communications team to say what the official narrative of this hospital being built was, or this whatever. And of course it's like, it's great, and the governor's amazing, and she's pretty. And then it's like, we come in there and say, well, actually, no, you didn't say this, and this. Here's the receipts for that. Could you answer that question? That's the piece that was missing. And so I believe it's the job of the journalist to dig into official narratives and ask questions. And for me, it matters, but are there people, and there's people on the opposite side who are making tons of money bashing Candace. Is Candace making a ton of money right now? Absolutely she is. And I just don't think that's her motive. I think she really is. Again, whether she's completely off base and out of touch, whatever, I don't question her motives as much as I do some of the people that are even being paid to attack her. There's money to be made on either side of any conspiracy, right? And it goes back to the beginning of our conversation, is the battle is for hearts and minds. And so what you want is public opinion to be to reflect what you want it to be so that you can accomplish your ends. And so no matter which side, you need public opinion to be this so that you can accomplish what you want. This other person needs public opinion to, be what they want so they can accomplish what they want. And we are just trying to get to the truth. Because if the truth lands on something that's actually politically advantageous to our opponents, we're still going to tell it because that's the truth. We're after the truth. And I think ultimately that's what's missing. But 100%, I think getting more to the heart of your question than the conspiracy aspect is is the catnip of clicks and engagement something that you have to guard against? 100%. However, the clicks and engagement for 1819 is one bellwether or litmus test to know what our audience wants. So like we're doing a bunch of stories on flock cameras right now. Why? Was it because anti-flock camera organization is funding 1819 News? No. Is it because we're trying to get mass engagement? No. It's because right now the people who read 1819 News every day are really upset about flock cameras and they're interested in this. And so you can use that engagement to test that you're actually writing about stuff that people care about. And we make the joke, we're not getting high on our own supply. We're just writing stories that we think are interesting. We actually have an audience to serve. But at 100%, yeah, you can easily fall into the trap of engagement farming and stuff like that. Jeff he's our editor in chief. He's super anti-engagement farming, but he also knows that we have to reach people. And so it's a constant balance, but I think at the end of the day, integrity has to reign, and that comes from culture, people, accountability, transparency, and those things.
Yeah, that's good. I think that, I think in a lot of ways it comes back to having a mission, right? And whether we're talking about Candace or Alex Jones or fill in the blank, there's so many, what's the mission? And what are you trying to accomplish? And so absolutely, poking holes in the official narrative, investigation, shining a light, on the truth, and that's all part of your mission, but you do have an ultimate mission. It's not engagement farming. It's not fundamentally make as much money as you possibly can. And so yeah, what I've seen, what I'm critical of, I guess, and I've seen a fair bit is the kind of just blackpilling, that I see so much of in conservative circles. The other thing I see in conservative circles is that, coming back again to the 5th gen warfare thing, is I see in the conservative world, the Christian world, we are typically our own worst enemies. Like we are constantly, I think of the Charlie Kirk assassination, and I look at that moment as a moment that was and I think could have been, even to a much greater degree, a moment of galvanization, of the conservative movement in America, of revival, in America, and how quickly I saw all of the momentum, of that. And I've even seen liberals, reporting on the assassination stuff and saying, man, this is great. Like, I'm so thankful that, like, this has taken all of the momentum and energy out of what was going to be potentially our biggest, sort of undoing. So I do worry about, just turning conservatives into just deconstruction, pessimists. And I think what you guys have is an actual optimistic, sort of victorious mission orientation that we're going to change the way politics happen in Alabama. We're going to make this state Christian. And I think if that's your North Star, go do whatever you need to do. But I see a lack of that kind of mission focus in others that I think you end up seeing these people drift.
Yeah, Larson, this is what I would say. Obviously, it is important to know who killed Charlie Kirk, insofar as we can determine that. But I think what can happen for some people at an individual level is they get more obsessed with figuring out who killed Charlie Kirk than they do with actually extending Charlie Kirk's mission. And I think that's where this has been damaging to, I'll just say, Christian causes or right wing causes, conservative causes. There's certainly a place for figuring that out. But if you become more obsessed with figuring out what actually happened that day in Utah than actually furthering the mission that Charlie was pursuing himself, then I think it becomes a real issue. And I think for some people, it can become a distraction. I really haven't invested time in it just because while I have a certain level of interest in that kind of thing, it's not really my responsibility to know. It's not in my wheelhouse. You know, I'm curious about it, but it's not the kind of thing I'm going to invest a lot of time in because I've got so many other things that I think are more central to my own mission than that. But I do think we need people who are doing this. So think about Nick Shirley, for example. Think about all the fraud that he has been able to expose. Okay, and those are things that never would have come to light through, you know, if all there is, you know, the mainstream media, mainstream news sources, none of that corruption, none of that fraud ever comes to light. Okay, you can say the same thing in our state. You know, there's all kinds of things that never would have come. The Bubba Copeland story that we talked about earlier would be a good example of this. All kinds of stories that never would have come to light without 1819 poking around and seeing what's going on and following leads and tracking down stories and, you know, examining the facts and then seeing what's really going on and then reporting it to, you know, the people in our state who are interested. So I think there's a lot of different layers to discussions like that in terms of, you know, various and while it is true there are conspiracies, not all conspiracy theories are equal. You know, some connect dots better than others, and you know, you sort of have to take them on a case by case basis. But in the realm of journalism, tracking those things down is certainly part of the job. It may not be your job, Larson, or my job. You know, it may be for us to wait and kind of see what the results are. I've just seen Christians at an individual level get distracted by, you know, again, get more focused on figuring out what's, you know, some conspiracy theory than actually investing their time, their energy in sharpening themselves so they can better fulfill the mission that God actually has assigned to them. And I think that can become an issue. And I think things like audience capture are real, but you know, the reality is that that is true in all of life. That's not unique to journalists. I mean, pastors face the same kind of thing. I mean, every week a pastor's got to ask himself, am I going to tell the congregation what they want to hear, or am I going to tell this congregation what the text actually says? Okay. It's the same thing. I mean, we all face it. We all face temptations to compromise.
Right. Well, there's the confirmation bias issue, right? Of whatever it is that you did to get them in is what you're going to have to keep doing to keep them. And so, you know, I see this. This is true on social media. This is true on AI. I mean, this is true in so many ways. Just who you pick as your friends, right? You become like what you surround yourself with, and so yeah. I think even as a mission. Or a dimension of the mission is who is our audience? You know, who is our audience? Who is the audience that we're trying to build? You know, that was kind of when we planted this church in Huntsville. That was central to our conversations at the very beginning. And there's some real obvious choices. For us as a CREC church, our question was, are we a church for CREC people? That's a fine thing to do. That's what a lot of CREC churches do. There's nothing wrong with it. Or in our case, are we a church aimed at our friends and our neighbors in Huntsville, Alabama, you know, in 2026? Those are two very different groups of people, right? And so, you know, some of the decisions we make about you know how we talk about our mission, what things we spend more time focusing on and teaching, et cetera, are very much driven by who it is who our audience is that we're pursuing. So I think that's that's an important part of this whole mission conversation.
The way I would put it, because again, I think this affects Christians in virtually every vocation, is what do you love more? Do you love truth or do you love comfort more? What do you love more? Do you love truth or do you love money more? You know, what do you love? Do you love truth or do you love fame and popularity? You know, what do you love most? And I think for Christians, we have to always prioritize the truth over those things. So if there comes a time where, you know, 1819 has to run an unflattering story about someone who's been, an ally up to that point, and let's say they do get caught in some kind of corruption, they've got to run the story, because they don't just exist to prop certain people up. They exist to pursue the truth as it's relevant to our state. And it's the same kind of thing with in pastoral ministry. If you're a pastor or an elder at a church, you've obviously got people that your church, your institution depends upon financially. But if that, let's just say that man gets caught in adultery, you have to be the kind of church that is willing to pursue a church discipline process, even if it meant excommunicating him, even if it meant the loss of that funding. I mean, that's just, you have to be faithful. You have to be focused on the truth. You have to be focused on the mission. And I think that's what faithful pastors do. And that's what faithful journalists do. And that's what faithful Christians do in every area of life. We are willing to make sacrifices in order to do what is right.
Yeah. I want to go back to the black pill conversation, because I think that's one of the most important things happening in the conservative movement at our churches with the next generation, the Gen Z guys, is the temptation from all of these things is to realize how bad things really are, and they are. But the question to me, it always goes back to, okay, then, so what do you do? Okay, so if whether Tyler Robinson killed Charlie Kirk or Mossad killed Charlie Kirk, the solution is the same, right? I'm interested in figuring that out because I think it matters. But at the end of the day, on any of these things, the enemies of Christ are currently conspiring every day to figure out how they can undercut Christendom and destroy the West and knock Jesus off of his throne. They are doing that day in and day out, be it Muslims, be it communists, atheists, whatever. The enemies of Christ are conspiring to dethrone Jesus and to destroy his civilization on this earth. That is happening 100%. Okay, so what do you do about it? Charlie Kirk had a great line. Get married, have more children than you can afford, right? Like, that's what he would say. And then as Rich and I podcasted on earlier this week, get married, have more children than you can afford, and then you use paideia and enculturate them into the Christian faith and the Western traditions through classical education. And you create citizens of the future Christian Commonwealth. That is what everyone needs to be doing, and you build. You build institutions, you build businesses, you build families, you build churches. Build, 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 build. Christ has promised us victory if we would seek to be faithful. And it's not faith. If it looks like you're going to win and you do what's necessary to win because it looks like you're going to win, that's not faith. It's going to look like something that you should blackpill about. Right? And in the face of circumstances that you could and should blackpill about, you're saying, no, actually, I'm just going to obey right now. And obeying is building. It's getting married. It's having children. It's teaching them about Christ and handing down our faith and our way of life. It's building, all those things I just listed. The response is be faithful and build, no matter the conspiracy, no matter the moment of feeling like blackpilling. Christ is on the throne. He's given us commands. If we obey them, he does miraculous things. And that's the path forward.
Yeah, so I think that's exactly right. And I will just add that usually when Charlie Kirk used that line, he started with go to church. Go to church, get married, have more kids than you can afford. I agree with our addition, of course, give them a Christian education. But yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right, Brian. I mean, we are fighting a multi-front war. And Satan is conspiring against the church. He is conspiring against the kingdom of Christ every single day. And whatever shape or form those conspiracies take, the reality is our duty remains the same. And that's the wonderful thing, is that even if we can't figure, every single one of these things out, our duty remains the same. Our mission is the same. We don't have to be deterred in any kind of way. We need to keep moving forward. We need to keep fighting. As Brian just said, we need to keep building.
Yeah, maybe the last word I'll say, and then we can give it to Brian to kind of bring us home. But the last word I'll say is, I come back to the gospel, and the gospel is not the good news that you have a way to go to heaven someday. The gospel is the good news that Christ is king, that he's been vindicated through his resurrection from the dead and seated on the throne. And so that's very, very good news for us today, not some future, reality, but a present reality. And the most common command that we are given in Scripture is to not fear. We are told over and over and over and over, do not fear. And particularly Jesus talking about not worrying about tomorrow. Today has enough trouble of its own. Specifically, don't worry about where your clothes are going to come from, where your food's going to come from. He makes this clear over and over. That God provides. Israel in the wilderness was provided food enough every single day. Miraculously, and He does the same for us today. And so we get to be free, from all of the worry and distractions that prevent us, from being, living on mission and coram Deo. But the good news is it sets us free from that worry. Well, Bryan, take us home, man. What you get the last word, and also please tell us if somebody's interested in learning more about 1819 or supporting 1819, where do they go?
I'll close with a story about getting into really what was at the heart of the podcast about the mission and the investment and the talents and all of these things, and people who pursue money thinking that money is the mission their whole lives, and they find themselves wealthy, and they're like King Solomon, and they're like, this is all vanity. One of the greatest things that's happened to 1819 News, and we're a month into the experiment, but is a guy that you would all know, Drew Hicks, Larson's brother, has a skill set that he could go into the defense industry or really anywhere and make tremendous sums of money. And that's what he was doing until Charlie Kirk got killed. And when Charlie Kirk got killed, he was wrecked and realized that there's a lot more to life than that, and wanted to find a mission. And he found some guys in his church and started a business and got it up and running. And he was actually helping me try and find an operations person, and just realized, I think this is actually what God wants me to do. And so he walked away from the pursuit of money to come join a mission, a worthy mission. And he has been an incredible asset. Just in the month that he's been here, has reshaped the way that we're doing everything. The response has been amazing. But when you see something like that, you see someone walk away from what could be financially to be part of the mission, that we've been building and sacrificing for the last 5 years. It's a nod. And when my investors and other employees who are completely invested in the mission see something like that happen, it's an affirmation that we're on the right track. And so not everyone's going to leave their career to come run operations for 1819. And so if you would like to be part of this mission, though, in whatever way you can, we are a 501c3 not-for-profit. That means your donations to 1819 News are anonymous, and they are tax deductible. And so as you think about your year-end giving going into quarter four, we would love to be in your year-end giving. We actually have a $250,000 match. So any funds given October 1st to December 31st up to $250,000 will be matched. And so we would love it if you would, whether it's $100 a month or it's $100,000, whatever you're motivated to do. And we have, like I said, we have people who've given us millions of dollars, and we have people who are giving us $100 a month and even lower than that. And so wherever you see yourself fitting in financially here, just know that that is an investment that will be the 5-talent investment, in the sense of the return on investment you'll get. Real political and cultural change, but more than that, real generational change for your children and grandchildren.
Well, thanks, Bryan. This has been a lot of fun. Rich, always a pleasure. I know we've already got our topic lined up for our next Got a Minute, so looking forward to recording that one with you. And blessings on you guys, and look forward to following what 1819 continues to do in Alabama, and hopefully this spreads to other states.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you next time.